everyone, I'm Suzanne Natzke and I'd like to welcome you to my demo, After Dark, Painting Vibrant Night Scenes in Watercolor. Night scenes are a favorite of mine because they offer so many exciting possibilities for rendering ordinary subjects in a very different way. I paint in a direct painting method, which simply means that I put in the desired color and value in a wash in one application. Today I'll show you how I develop my composition from a photo reference, how to mix pigments to get strong dark values, and how to apply those dark values in a direct painting method for a streak-free and luminous result. And I'll also share with you a masking technique that will hopefully add a little sparkle to your paintings. So let's get started. On the right is the original photograph that I took at the fireworks. And like most photo references, it's going to need a little bit of editing in order to make for a better composition. So I start by putting my pictures in Photoshop Elements or cropping them on my cell phone if I've used my cell phone to condense things down to what I really would like to include. And there was a lot of dark value here and some palm trees over here, but I really didn't like the way the fireworks were dead center, so I had it cropped down. The fireworks are slightly off to the right, and I have removed a lot of that dark area. So in my drawing I have taken this street light and shrunk that down a little bit because it seemed a little too assertive compared to the fireworks. And I did bring some palm trees in from the left just to add a little interest, and those will pick up a little bit of highlight on their leaves. The next thing I need to do is select the colors that I'm going to use. And when I'm doing that, I usually just get a piece of scrap paper and play around with colors, trying to test different colors and see if I can make some of the things that I want to include in the picture. I want to stress that I never try to copy and match everything exactly. My goal is to pick a limited palette of approximately 3 to 6 colors and be able to work within that to make whatever I need for my painting. So you can see over here I was playing around with different things to get the dark reddish color of the sky. I knew I needed some gold for the fireworks and this yellow building back here. And then there are some mid-tone and dark gray colors in here on the boats. These would probably normally be white hulls during the bright light of day, but at night they look kind of grayish, so I was playing around with some colors to achieve that. So I finally settled on the 5 colors that I'm going to use for this painting, and that is Hansa Yellow Light, Raw Sienna, Cobalt Blue, Alizarin Crimson, and Phthalo Green. The Raw Sienna and Cobalt Blue make really nice grade colors that I can use in the marina. And also I do want a few pops of pure blue here to counteract all the reddish gold colors, because overall this is kind of a warm painting, and that will provide a few bits of cool contrast. And then of course alizarin and phthalo green combine to make some really rich, lovely dark values. They're both strong, transparent staining colors. In order to make enough dark paint to be able to cover all of this, because I'll need it in the sky and in the water, what I like to do is premix my dark values. And I've got a little jar here that I have used to mix up the phthalo green and the alizarin crimson so that I will have a huge supply of paint and not run out 3/4 of the way through the painting. That would be kind of a disaster because you would have to stop and remix more paint right in the middle of your sky or something like that. And that's how you end up with funny lines and streaks. So I have a collection of little containers. Sometimes I just use a cup if I'm not making too big of a batch. But I don't mind making a little extra because you can put the lid on and save it for other projects. And when I'm working with something like this, I start with about a third, usually 1/4 to a third, filling it with water. And then I add my pigment, and I will squeeze quite a bit into the container, whatever it is. And so to make this particular mixture, which you can see is quite dark, that's a clear jar, and you can see how rich that looks in there. But let's open it up. And it's quite dark. So I squeezed about an inch long strip of the phthalo green and 2-inch long strip of the alizarin crimson into that water. And then I took my Dirty Jobs brush, which is just this little inexpensive 1/2-inch flat that I've had for 15 years, and it cost me about $1.50. And I just kept stirring and stirring and stirring and mashing that pigment against the sides and just kept working on it. And it took me about 10 minutes to get it nice and smooth, no lumps. We don't need any blobs of unmixed paint coming out. But then I wanted to test and make sure that it was dark enough. So let's take a piece of paper, and you can see just how rich that color can be when you pre-mix it. And you can thin it out as well, but I got a nice sort of a reddish black using those two colors in a 2-to-1 proportion, and I will not run out. There's plenty in there for this painting and probably a couple more. The other preliminary task that I needed to handle was to do some masking. I want to be able to paint this entire sky and the water without having to stop and paint around things. And normally I'm not a big fan of masking fluid because I do like to paint around shapes. I kind of like the way it looks. But when you have lacy objects like fireworks and tall skinny masts and little highlights and things all over the place, it just makes sense to use some masking fluid. The brand that I use does look a little darker, which is nice, so you can see where I have added masking to this painting. And I've done the fireworks, at least some of them. This smokier area over here, these are previously exploded fireworks. I'm going to handle that a little bit differently. So I did not really mask anything there. And I took care of the masts and a bunch of little bits of light that are showing up in the marina and a few reflections in the water. I've also, using a toothpick, just a little plastic toothpick, I dragged some masking fluid back here to kind of hint at these masts in the distance. They don't show up a whole lot, but I'd like to have a little bit of activity back there. Anything that I have covered with masking fluid can be adjusted later if I need to add some color back into the picture. There is one additional application of masking fluid that I want to make before I start painting, and that requires the use of a toothbrush. And basically what I'm doing with this was to pick up some masking fluid. I take a piece of scrap paper and flick it once to make sure I know the size of the splatter and that I don't have any big giant blobs coming off of there. And then when I'm happy with that, then I flicked it into this area here, some down here where the reflections of the fireworks are, and a little bit up here in a couple of areas. And the reason for doing this is because in the painting, this lower left area is the darkest, densest part of the picture. And with that thick, heavy value of paint, it could look kind of flat. And by flicking in a few little teeny speckles of masking fluid, when you remove that at the end, there's a little bit of sparkle there. And there'll be a little bit of sparkle wherever you do that. So it adds a nice little touch and keeps the darkest areas of your painting from looking too flat. Now it's time to paint the picture. And the first question most people usually have is, where do we begin? I think it's basically up to personal preference. In this case, I prefer to do the sky, but I also think that if there is an area of the painting that makes you scared or nervous, or you find it challenging, I would do that first and get it over with, and then you can enjoy the rest of the picture. So I'm going to start with applying clean, fresh water. I'm working with a 1-inch flat brush. And I also have my dark paint in the jar that I mixed up earlier. I have some hints of yellow, and this is alizarin crimson. And I'm going to be working a little bit of the yellow and a lot of the crimson into the sky in this area as I paint, because it's not all a dark sky. There's definitely a reddish glow, and I would like to make that happen in this picture. I also have a little bit of white gouache over here, and I'll show you what we're going to do with that in just a moment. The first thing I want to do is establish that red glow. And now I'm going to dip into that dark value and start applying that. Now I know that looks a little scary. Always remember, with watercolor, it dries about 30% lighter. So this too will lighten up quite a bit once it's dry. And that's sometimes the hard part of this, is to come in with that really strong dark. So now I've got a lot of paint on here, and I want to hit this with my mister. It's just a really fine mist. I like being able to pick it up and have it bend this way, because it allows me to run things in different directions at the same time. I'm trying to keep things running away from my fireworks. There. That feels a lot better. when you have masking fluid, sometimes pigment can kind of dam up around it. You can always just wick it out with a little bit of tissue. If you have a little puddle somewhere, just by touching the tissue end, it won't leave a mark. It'll just help lift a little bit in certain areas. Anyway, now that this is the way I want it, I'm going to use a rigger. This is a number 3 rigger, and I'm going to pick up some of this white gouache, pretty thick. And in these areas where there's smoke, it's not as bright as the original fireworks, but there's smoke there. I'm just going to drop in some of that gouache in those areas. And because this is so wet, it will diffuse. And I can even put some of the little squiggles and linear marks, and they will softly diffuse in the wet paint. Using a 1/2 inch angle brush, I'm going to use my dark value paint mixture to put in a very shadowy version of a couple of palm trees here. And by the way, I've lifted the masking fluid from the mid portion up. So I've reserved some highlights here, and I can save them if I want, or if I don't like them all, I'm always free to cover over things that don't work. At this point, I want to start working the middle portion of the painting. And for this, I am going to primarily be using this is a 14 round with a good point. And I want to get my 5 colors. Oops. The 5 colors again were the Hansa Yellow Medium, Raw Sienna, make a couple puddles of that, and Cobalt Blue, plus the alizarin and phthalo green. So the first thing I want to do is address the masts and the fireworks, even though we do need to come down here, but this is all connected. So looking at my photo reference, there is a lot of white up here, but it's not all white. There are some hints of other bits of color in there, just a little bit here and there. So I want to kind of gently break that up a little bit. And then I'm mixing the raw sienna with the yellow to get kind of a gold color. And I want to bring that out here. The very tips are white, but a lot of these streaky little pieces have definitely got some color in them. once we'll get to the highlights on this tree, the trees, once they're dry, but for now I'm going to turn it sideways so I can address the masts on the boats. And those have kind of there's definitely some highlights on them, but they're also not terribly bright. They're kind of, I want to knock those down a little. So I don't need the highlight to run the entire length either. This one actually is much darker and more obscured than the other masts, so I can. This one actually goes up into the fireworks, so it is going to be a darker value against the lighter background. We have all these smaller masts, and they don't show up a lot, but they do show up a little bit, and for that I definitely want this kind of grayed color just to knock down that bright white and help them blend into the background. This is almost dry. I'm going to take a little bit of the phthalo green, which is strong stuff. I just need a little bit to mix with the yellowish color here. You could even mix it with the raw sienna to get a little bit of green highlight for these palm fronds. So all those preserved, most of those preserved areas are going to get touched with that greenish gold. For the highlight. Now I can start bringing in the middle ground here. This is actually some foliage back in here, and it's very dark, so I can take that phthalo green, add a little bit of alizarin to it, and it starts out dark at the corner, but then it does kind of lighten up as it moves this way because there's some kind of light over at this end. And this is kind of deceiving because we look at something like this and we think, well, that's kind of hard to see, but we think, oh, that's a white boat. But it's in the dark, and that value is actually very different than what it would be in the daytime. So don't be afraid to make things dark enough. This front portion is being hit by light, so it's definitely warmer, or excuse me, warmer and lighter. and there is some kind of red light being reflected on there, so I'm going to pop that in. Behind it there is another light colored boat sticking up. I'm going to keep that pretty light. It's not white, and it goes back behind. That area. Okay. We're at the stage where we are ready to put in the water, and I will be using the dark mixture that I had used in the sky, but I won't be mixing it with the red. It'll be darker here. And I also need a few other little colors to drop in here and there to suggest the reflections. Even though in the picture they're very hard to see, I do want to have some indication of the boat's hull and some other things that are of interest there. So I'm going to start with that dark value. In this spot right here, I left it light. I'm going to bring a little bit of dark value up here. But those are also reflections of the lighter hulls of the boat. So I'm just going to sort of put a little water there and let it flow in. And then I can continue around here. I'm just using my round brush. You could also use a flat brush. And here where the hull of the boat is, I'm just wetting the paper, and I'm going to drop in some of that gray and then continue on across. This is a very dark value area, so I don't have to worry about thinning anything out. Now I am going to drop a little bit of red in here. And I'm going to lift some areas or put water in to cause some reflections to sort of make themselves running downward. I want things to go vertically. And I want some of this. This is the area down here of the fireworks reflection. So I want that to lighten up quite a bit. I have masking fluid in there, but I also want to get some color in there with a little bit of red and yellow. We are now in the final stage of the painting, and I have removed all the masking fluid that remained, and then I came in and added a little bit of color to a lot of those masked areas. I still want them to be a light value, but I just wanted to add little bits of red, yellow, and blue to kind of tone down the hard edges of the masking and to add a little bit of sparkle and color to the overall picture. You can also see that little bit of sparkle in this dark area that I had applied with the toothbrush in masking fluid. I also adjusted a little bit on the fireworks. Other than that, I did a value check to make sure that things were dark enough where I needed them to be, and that meant adding a little bit more paint to the hull of the boat and adjusting the building and a few other pieces. But I'm pretty satisfied at this point. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this demonstration. I also hope that it will inspire you to try a night scene in watercolor.